The afternoon sun was high, casting long shadows across the quiet street as Officer Malik Thompson pulled into a parking space near his favorite local diner. It had been a long shift, 12 hours of community patrol, paperwork, and training cadets. His uniform was crisp, his badge gleaming in the sunlight, and his mind was focused on grabbing a quick bite before heading home. This was a neighborhood he knew well, a place where he'd helped mentor teens and de-escalate tensions more times than he could count. He didn't expect trouble here. Not today. He stepped out of his unmarked police vehicle, stretching his back and adjusting his radio. As he shut the door and walked toward the diner, he caught a glimpse of two police cruisers speeding down the road toward him. Their sirens weren't on, but their urgency was clear. He instinctively glanced behind him, thinking they might be after someone else. But within seconds, both cars screeched to a halt right in front of him. Two white officers jumped out, hands already near their weapons. "Hey, you! Step away from the vehicle!" one shouted, eyes narrow and locked onto Malik. Malik raised his hand slowly, showing the palm that held his badge. "Officer Malik Thompson," he said calmly, voice steady. "I'm with the 45th Precinct. Badge number 20861. But the officers weren't listening. "Put your hands where we can see them." The other barked, already circling behind Malik. "Keep your mouth shut. I'm on duty," Malik said, louder this time, even pointing to the department patch on his shoulder. "This is a misunderstanding. Turn around and face the car," the first officer yelled. A few pedestrians nearby had started to gather, sensing something was off. A couple eating lunch at an outdoor table stopped mid-bite. A mother pulled her child closer, whispering something in his ear. The tension thickened like a storm rolling in. Before Malik could say another word, the officer behind him grabbed his arms and twisted them behind his back. The force was unnecessary. Malik didn't resist. But still, the officer jerked his hands hard and locked the handcuffs in place. "You're making a mistake," Malik said through clenched teeth. "You got a smart mouth, huh?" The officer sneered. "We'll see what your story is when we get downtown." His badge slipped from his fingers and fell onto the sidewalk with a dull clink. It lay there, gleaming in the sunlight, ignored. One of the diners inside stood up, pressing his face against the window. Another woman began filming on her phone. Malik was pushed down onto the curb like a criminal, the metal of the handcuffs digging into his wrists. He looked around, not with fear but with a heartbreaking disappointment. He had trained to serve and protect, and now, even in full uniform, his skin had spoken louder than his badge. One officer radioed in something about a suspicious male in tactical gear. The other hovered close, arms crossed, smug. Neither of them acknowledged his ID, the department sticker on his windshield, or the very real fact that the man they had just cuffed had more years in service than both of them combined. No one intervened. The world seemed frozen, watching a scene that had become all too familiar. A black man, restrained without cause. A uniform, ignored. And two men with power, too blind to see the mistake they had made. Malik looked down at his badge lying in the dust and closed his eyes. He knew this moment would not end here. It would ripple. Because today, they had picked the wrong man. Malik sat on the curb, his back straight despite the discomfort of the tight handcuffs cutting into his wrists. His navy blue uniform, once neatly pressed and proudly worn, was now creased and dusty. The sidewalk felt hot beneath him, but the fire in his chest burned hotter. He had always known that the uniform could offer a shield, but only up to a point. In this moment, it offered none. His badge still lay on the ground a few feet away, untouched and unacknowledged. The two white officers stood nearby, talking amongst themselves in hushed but heated tones. One of them kept glancing over his shoulder at Malik, clearly unsure. The other remained stone-faced, rigid in his authority, refusing to admit even a shadow of doubt. They still hadn't checked his ID properly. They hadn't called in his badge number. They hadn't even asked a single question since the handcuffs were locked. To them, it was open and shut. A black man in tactical gear near a vehicle, automatically suspicious. A small crowd had gathered. A few onlookers lingered near the entrance of the diner. Cell phones were out, cameras rolling. People whispered. Some were angry, some confused, most just stunned. A heavy silence hung over the sidewalk, broken only by the low static of a nearby radio and the distant hum of city traffic. No one dared to interrupt the scene, but they were all watching. From the edge of the diner steps, a woman in her 40s stepped forward slowly. She wore an apron and still held a notepad in her hand, her name tag reading, Tina. Her voice was soft, but it carried a determined weight. "Excuse me," she said, addressing the officers. "He's a police officer. I saw his badge." The officer who had cuffed Malik turned sharply. "Step back, ma'am. This doesn't concern you." "It does," she replied, taking another cautious step. "He eats here every Thursday. Everyone in this neighborhood knows Officer Thompson. You're making a mistake. Ma'am, step away now or you'll be interfering," the second officer warned, his hand moving toward his belt. Tina held up her hands and slowly backed away, but not before pulling out her phone and tapping on the screen. Malik watched her silently. That gesture alone, the courage to speak, even briefly, meant more than words could express. More phones were raised now. A teenage boy across the street mouthed, "This is crazy," to someone beside him. A young man in business attire muttered, "He's one of us, what the hell are they doing?" Despite the rising tension, the officers refused to budge. They made no move to verify Malik's identity, no attempt to radio in his credentials. It was as if the badge didn't exist, as if his uniform was a costume, as if the years of service he had dedicated to protecting this very city were invisible. Malik swallowed hard and looked up. "I'd like to make a call," he said firmly. The officer stared at him for a moment. His lip curled, as if even this small act of control grated on him. Finally, with an exaggerated sigh, he pulled out Malik's phone from his utility belt. "Fine. One call. Make it count," he said, unlocking the screen and dropping the phone into Malik's cuffed hands. His fingers fumbled slightly before he steadied them. He scrolled through his contacts, found the name he needed, and hit dial. As the phone rang, a hush seemed to fall over the sidewalk again. Every eye turned to Malik. Every camera stayed fixed. One call. One voice on the other end. That was all it would take. Because while the uniform may have been ignored, Malik's voice still carried power, and someone very high up was about to hear it. The phone rang only twice before a familiar voice picked up. "Captain Reyes," came the sharp, no-nonsense tone on the other end. Malik steadied his voice, but the weight of humiliation clung to every syllable. "Captain, it's Malik. I'm on the corner of 5th and Fulton. In uniform. Handcuffed." There was a pause. Just one beat. Then the voice turned cold and furious. "Who cuffed you?" "2 patrol officers. Didn't check my ID. Ignored my badge. They said I looked suspicious." Another silence, this time longer. He could practically hear her heartbeat syncing with his, a slow, boiling rhythm of disbelief. "Don't move. I'm coming. Myself." The line went dead. Malik lowered the phone into his lap. His hands were still cuffed behind his back, so the screen dropped against his leg and stayed there. He didn't look at the officers. He didn't need to. Their time was running out, and deep down, they were starting to feel it. 15 minutes crawled by like hours. During that time, traffic thickened. The diner's lunch rush came and went with half the patrons too stunned to eat. More people gathered. A local news crew arrived, alerted by the viral video that had already begun spreading. A woman interviewed a bystander who muttered, "That man's a cop. I've seen him break up fights at the park. They tackled him like a criminal." The officers stood stiffly, pretending to maintain control, but they were sweating now. One of them fidgeted, his eyes scanning the crowd as if he could still find an excuse that would make this all go away. The other tried to appear calm, arms crossed, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed him. Then it happened. A sleek black SUV rounded the corner and came to a hard stop. Out stepped Captain Isabel Reyes, dressed in plain clothes but moving with the command of a storm. Beside her was the deputy commissioner himself, a man whose presence alone was enough to part crowds. Gasps rose from the onlookers. Cameras zoomed in. Phones lifted higher. Captain Reyes stormed toward Malik without a word, her eyes flaring with outrage. She knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "Malik, you okay?" she asked, her voice low but razor sharp. He nodded slightly. "Physically, yes. Pride, not so much." She turned. Her stare landed on the 2 officers like thunderbolts. "Who's in charge here?" she snapped. One of them stepped forward reluctantly. "I am. Officer Granger." "Explain yourself," she demanded. "We received a call about a suspicious man in tactical gear near an unmarked car," he said, already stumbling. "When we arrived, he she interrupted, as Officer Malik Thompson. A 10-year veteran. Medal of Valor. You didn't verify his ID. His badge was in his hand. Granger opened his mouth, but no words came out. Reyes didn't wait. Remove the cuffs. Now. The other officer moved hesitantly to comply. Malik stood slowly, rolling his shoulders, the red marks from the cuffs clearly visible on his wrists. The deputy commissioner stepped forward then, his voice like a knife through glass. Both of you. Effective immediately, you're suspended. Turn in your weapons and badges before sundown. And prepare for a full internal affairs investigation. The silence in the crowd was thunderous. The officers looked around, stunned, humiliated, helpless. They had no idea that the man they handcuffed had the respect of the entire department behind him. No idea that the quiet phone call would summon their reckoning. Captain Reyes turned back to Malik. You want to press charges? Malik looked at the growing crowd, the flashing cameras, the children watching. Then he said, I want this never to happen again. And with that, the tide turned. The press conference was held 3 days later in front of the city courthouse, with rows of microphones lined up like soldiers awaiting orders. Reporters filled the plaza, cameras flashing as Malik Thompson stepped up to the podium in full dress uniform. His posture was steady, composed, but his eyes carried the weight of the week, the weight of years, really. Years of knowing that for some, his badge would never outshine his skin. Behind him stood Captain Reyes, the deputy commissioner, several respected officers from various precincts, and even a few community leaders. The show of solidarity was clear. But so was the reason they were all there. Malik took a deep breath and adjusted the microphone. His voice, when it came, was calm but unwavering. What happened to me last week isn't rare, he began. What is rare is that this time, someone with a badge was the one wearing the cuffs, and the cameras were already rolling. Murmurs moved through the crowd. The sound of clicking shutters echoed across the plaza. I've served this city for over a decade, Malik continued. I've broken up gang fights. I've talked down armed suspects. I've knocked on doors to deliver bad news that no one ever wants to hear. I've worn this badge with pride, with discipline, with loyalty to the oath I took. But last week, none of that mattered. I was a threat before I was an officer. I was a suspect before I was a name. He paused. The air was still. I was handcuffed in broad daylight, in uniform, by two men who refused to ask questions. Who refused to look at my ID. Who saw the color of my skin and made a decision. He glanced behind him at Captain Reyes, who gave him a small nod of support. This isn't about me seeking revenge. It's about accountability. It's about the systems we defend being held to the same standard we promised to uphold. And it's about the next young black officer who puts on this uniform, praying it will protect him. Malik stepped away from the podium for a moment, retrieving something from the inside of his jacket. He held up his badge, the same one that had fallen onto the sidewalk just days earlier. This badge means something, he said quietly. But it only has power when everyone respects what it stands for. Applause broke out across the crowd. It started slowly, respectfully, but grew louder, more passionate. Reporters turned their cameras from Malik to the officers standing behind him, filming their proud, solemn faces. Later that evening, both Officer Granger and his partner officially lost their jobs. The department released a statement citing gross misconduct, racial profiling, and excessive force without just cause. The video of Malik's arrest had amassed millions of views. Public opinion was swift and unforgiving. But for Malik, the true impact wasn't in the views or the headlines. He received letters from black cadets saying they almost quit the academy, but now they wouldn't. A mother sent a note saying her son, once afraid of all cops, had started to believe there might be good ones after all. And Tina, the waitress who had spoken up, was invited to speak at a city town hall about civilian courage and community safety. Justice hadn't erased the pain, but it had created a ripple. And Malik Thompson, once forced to sit on a curb like a criminal, now stood taller than ever, not just as an officer, but as a symbol of change the city could no longer ignore.